Today, Americans are set to file their taxes.
While we're paying over $4,000 as the average taxpayer for war and weapons, by contrast, the average taxpayer only paid about $2,500 for Medicaid.
So when trillions of dollars are set to fill the coffers of the world's largest federal budget, how does that affect the entire world? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Hi. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment. Tell us what you think about this topic. What do you make of the moral case for taxes in the United States? What do you think about the priorities of the United States federal government and how it affects the rest of the world? And remember to give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help the show.
My name is Lindsay Koshgarian. I am the program director at the National Priorities Project of the Institute for Policy Studies, and I am based in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Okay, Lindsay, it's great to have you back on The Take. So we are having this conversation on Tuesday, April 14th. That's the eve of what is known in the U.S. as Tax Day. This is the annual deadline for people in the United States to submit their individual income taxes to the federal government. Now, our listeners might be asking, why are we covering this U.S. tax day? This is an international show, but the reason is simple. It's because we're talking about an absolutely huge sum of money here, and where that money is spent has global repercussions. So let's just start with some baseline numbers. For the fiscal year of 2025, the federal government collected $5.26 trillion. About half of that, $2.6 trillion, comes from individual income taxes. So in broad strokes, where does all that money go? How is that pie divided?
Well, one of the reasons that we look at Americans' tax receipt every year is because of where the money goes and that money affecting the rest of the world, specifically through the U.S. military budget, which is the number one military budget in the world. It's the largest. It accounts for almost 40% of global military spending. And of course, that has huge repercussions when the U.S. chooses to use that investment to do things like attack Iran or invade Venezuela or other choices that we've seen recently from the U.S. federal government. So what we found this year was that, for example, the average U.S. taxpayer paid over $4,000 for the U.S. for war and weapons, and how that compares to some other programs for things that benefit people here in the United States. And what we found is that while we're paying over $4,000 as the average taxpayer for war and weapons, by contrast, the average taxpayer only paid about $2,500 for Medicaid, which is the largest health insurance program run by the federal government for low-income Americans.
Wow. Okay. So in terms of the pie, about 60% of the federal budget is mandatory programs. This is like things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Then you have this other pie, which is discretionary spending. Is that where the defense money comes in the discretionary section?
Yes, the U.S. military budget is in the discretionary portion of the budget. All that means is that it's the money that Congress allocates every year. And so for this year, Congress has allocated $1 trillion for the war budget for the first time since World War II.
And then the third pot of money is very substantial as well. This is net interest on the debt. In terms of the interest that we're paying on the debt, the United States is paying on the debt. How does that compare with payments for things like Medicare?
The interest on the debt is actually quite high. Right now, the interest on the debt for people in the United States, for the average taxpayer, is paying also over $4,000. So it's right in the similar range to what we're paying for war and weapons. Now, the interesting relationship between those two things is that quite a significant portion of our debt as the United States is for previous wars. Remember, we were in Afghanistan for 20 years. We were in Iraq for many years, still to this day. And so quite a significant portion of that debt is also attributable to the military and to U.S. wars.
Wow. Okay. So your report makes the case that the federal budget is not just a policy document. It's also kind of a moral mirror that reflects the values of the society kind of back on itself. In fact, the report is called The Moral Failures of Trump's Budget Policies. You argue that recent Trump GOP budgets systematically shift resources from the poor and the low-income people to wealthy people, to corporations, and the war machine more generally. So you did all this work. You lined up all of this evidence. You're ready to argue your case. And then Trump says this at the White House.
The United States can't take care of daycare. That has to be up to a state. We can't take care of daycare. We're a big country. We have 50 states. We have all these other people. We're fighting wars. We can't take care of daycare. You got to let a state take care of daycare, and they should pay for it, too.
Lindsay, I wonder how this makes you feel when he says the quiet part out loud. Does this make your job easier, or in a weird way, does it make it harder?
What makes it hard is the fact that they're doing this in the first place. So frankly, we've been sharing that Trump quote about how we are fighting wars and we can't afford childcare and we can't afford Medicaid. We've been sharing that every chance we get because we want to make people to understand that this is intentional, that this is not an accident. This is not some oversight. This is an intentional policy choice to invest in war and to make war rather than to invest in people here in the United States. And right now, the United States is hurting. More than half of people here say that they're struggling to afford basic necessities like housing and healthcare and food. And in the light of that, for Trump to make this extremely insensitive comment, really, we want people to understand that this is not an accident, that he is not, that he's not pulling for us, that he's not trying his best for us. Because we also, we also make our choices. We still have a democracy here in the United States, for whatever that's worth. And we want people to understand which choices their government is making and who their government is fighting for. And the fact is right now, the government is not fighting for the average United States person.
Yeah, what's different is that in the past, they would sort of hide the ball. They would use terms like small government conservatives. To be saying this so explicitly, I mean, I understand that it might make your job easier because you can just point to this clip. But when they're no longer trying to hide their priorities, it really is just full-scale warfare, and you have to come ready for battle.
Yes. Well, and another thing we know is, he referenced the fact that we're fighting wars. People here are aware of the war on Iran, and it's not popular. We have a poll that showed that almost 60% of people in the United States do not want to spend more money for the war on Iran. And then if you ask them if they want to shift money from healthcare to pay more money for the war on Iran, that goes up to 70% of people in this country. So the fact that he came right out and said it and said that they're doing the thing that 70% of people in this country do not want is really significant. And I think we want that clip to be seen as broadly as it can be, because people, like I said, need to understand that this is a deliberate policy choice that they're making.
So according to your report, cuts to Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, and related changes could lead to about 51,000 preventable deaths each year, put more than 14 million people at risk of losing health insurance. Can you help us put this in human terms? Explain why you frame this as truly a matter of life and death and not just budget tightening.
Well, first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't first recognize the life or death situation for people in the Middle East. For Iranians and so many people in Lebanon and elsewhere. And, the U.S. war on Iran has led to thousands of deaths, millions of people fleeing their homes. So that's, of course, the first thing. And people in the United States should care about that as well. But the second thing for people here in the United States is that last year, Trump and his GOP allies did pass this law, which was their big, beautiful bill is what they called it. But it's a big, ugly bill for Americans because it is leading to this defunding of healthcare that is putting 14 million people in this country at risk of losing their health insurance. Health insurance in the United States is already far more expensive than in many other countries, and people have to procure their own health care. So this is a huge danger for people here. And there was a study, that we cited that showed that potentially just from the loss of health care and people not receiving, basic services that they need for things like diabetes or heart disease, that it could lead to 51,000 otherwise preventable deaths. And so these are all the policies of this administration, and they are all connected, as we saw in very clear relief from that quote that Trump said the other week. And people are feeling this also. There is another federal government health insurance program, the Affordable Care Act, has also been cut in the last year by this administration. People now have to pay more for their own health insurance through that program. And more than half of the people who are getting insurance through that program now say that they are having to cut back on other household expenses, including food, in order to afford that health insurance. So people in the United States really are feeling it themselves. And we just want people to know that it's not just them. It's a very widespread problem.
Lindsay, I know you started off as an organizer in Planned Parenthood, which is the single largest provider of reproductive health services and the largest single provider of abortions in the United States. How have these priorities in the budget impacted access to reproductive care in the United States?
Well, I don't get that question very often, but those are my roots, are in reproductive health care. So this administration has, of course, been completely disastrous for reproductive health care in the United States and around the world. President Trump has appointed Supreme Court justices who reversed the Roe v. Wade decision that kept abortion illegal for all 50 states in the United States. That is now no longer the case. And then around the world, the Trump administration has also, this is something where United States administrations play tug of war back and forth about policies and whether they'll allow international aid to go to reproductive health care organizations in other parts of the world. And the Trump administration has brought it back to where, in addition to all the international aid that they're cutting off for just so many reasons, and the fact that they don't believe in supporting and investing in the rest of the world, they have cut back specifically reproductive health care because they want to make sure that they're not supporting any abortion care anywhere in the world. And so it's hit people here in the United States very hard, and it's hit people around the world probably even harder.
We'll have more with Lindsay after a break. So, Lindsay, let's talk a little bit more about the defense budget. You warned that Donald Trump and GOP leaders want to raise the national defense budget about 42% to about $1.5 trillion in a single year. Meanwhile, some estimates warn that the war in Iran was costing about $500 million per day. I mean, the statistics vary, but I've seen that.
Yes.
You also note that roughly half of Pentagon spending goes to corporate contractors, and that the top 5 contractors pay their CEOs tens of millions of dollars each year. I wonder how you think that the concentration of public money into private hands can help produce a budget that looks like this.
Well, there are so many ways. I mean, what we know is we had some statistics during the first Trump administration where we could see that the CEOs of the major military contractors were visiting the White House often. So when you think about how the closeness of that relationship, and that's somewhat typical for the United States. Some people have even said things like, that the CEO of Lockheed Martin, which is the top U.S. military contractor, should be a cabinet position for the United States because the relationship is so close between the president and this defense secretary and this company. So it's hard to overstate how enmeshed it is. But of course, there are also campaign contributions where corporations can give money to political campaigns through all sorts of different sort of dark money means and other avenues that are hard to trace. There are lobbying contributions. And so this is something that, as the peace activist community in the United States struggles with, is that the military contractors have lobbyists who are walking the halls of Congress every day, talking to members of Congress, telling them why they need to support weapons programs. And there is no equivalent lobbying force for peace or for demilitarism. So this is a real struggle in the United States. And it's another important way where, you have someone walking into a congressional office telling them about the jobs they create, for example, in their district. And this is another sort of myth in the United States that weapons production is some huge job creator, and that's why members of Congress have to support it. So that's an argument that the industry and the corporations make very frequently. And it's just not true, especially not in the way that it used to be. There was a study by the defense industry itself that found that whereas there used to be in the 1980s 3 million jobs in these contractors in the United States. There are now only 1 million. So that's not very many for a country as big as the United States. We have a population of about 350 million people, and they're still using that argument to go to Congress and say, here's why you have to support, like you said, this $1 trillion. And now they are asking for $1.5 trillion war budget.
Yeah, I think people in the rest of the world would be shocked if they could see what this process looks like up close. People in the United States have internalized it, but in other parts of the world, it's just straight up bribery. They call it lobbying.
Yes.
I do want to, we're a little short on time. I do want to ask you about ICE, if I could. Your report details how about $170 billion were added to mass deportation machine that we're seeing. It more than doubles funding for ICE and Customs and Border Protection since 2024. That includes $45 billion for expanded immigrant detention. Do you view this as part of the same sort of moral and fiscal story as tax cuts for the wealthy and increased war spending?
I do view it as part of the same story. I view it as part of the story that says that they are going to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of the people who are their chosen few. And I think there's one really clear illustration of this for the Trump administration is the few refugees who they are allowing into the United States. There's mass deportation for most undocumented people in this country. And that is hitting Black and brown communities really hard because the administration is not able to just check people's immigration status. And so they're targeting anyone who looks like they might be an undocumented immigrant, which just means people with darker skin. But the one group of refugees that they have welcomed in are white Afrikaners from South Africa. And so that is just an astounding illustration of what the real reasons behind this are. It's a combination of white supremacist ideology that's held by some of the top people in this administration and a focus on state violence that I think is what you see in sort of the investment in war and the investment in mass deportations, where it's the idea that the state can use violent means to control whatever it wants, whatever the president wants.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that Donald Trump's political project is called Make America Great Again. We don't know when that was specifically. We assume it was in the 50s and 60s, and marginal tax rates were at 90% when America was great previously. Worth pointing out.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Always worth pointing out. Okay, Lindsay, last question. It is easy to get overwhelmed by the numbers, but this report makes the case that underneath the spreadsheets, this is about political choices, not inevitabilities, right? What would you have to change in terms of voter expectations and party politics, particularly on the Republican side, for tax day debates to finally shift away from the kind of how do we cut mindset to the how do we tax fairly and spend on what's best for the public good?
Yeah, so obviously the United States has a big partisanship problem right now where many Republicans are sort of in a whatever Trump says religious moment, if you will. I think the thing, though, is that a lot of Americans are more united around these ideas than the current common story would lead you to believe. For example, I mentioned earlier that there's a poll that showed that 70% of people in the United States would be against cutting healthcare in order to pay for the war on Iran. So there's a lot more agreement on some of these things than the current political climate would lead you to believe. What I think we need, first of all, probably candidates who are able to talk plainly and clearly about these things. The Democratic Party has just not been strong on that. And they're the only major party alternative to the Republican Party. So we need more candidates who can speak more clearly about these things, because that is when people listen the most. But we also need a lot of popular education, which is what we do, so that people can understand more about what is happening, more about what this war in Iran means for them, how it's connected to what they might be experiencing in terms of paying more at the gas pump or paying more for health insurance, and why those things are connected. But then we need to give people real alternatives of policies and candidates to support that really change that dynamic. And I think that has been a weakness in the United States, that we haven't had adequate alternatives.
Okay. Lindsay, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Okay. Thanks for having me.